Since 2003, this is the Sports Source, East Tennessee's #1 sports talk show.
Presented by Pipe Wrench, and by Junk Be Gone, and by the Garza Law Firm.
With your host, John Pennington. The Sports Source starts now.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome into the Sports Source here in our Junk Be Gone studios. We appreciate you being with us on another summer Sunday as we try and beat the heat here in East Tennessee. We're going to be talking about SEC Media Days. Well, actually, SEC Media Days is this week in Dallas with 16 teams. We're going to be talking about how things have changed. We did a little of this last week. We're going to kind of carry it over this week, talk about scheduling, talk about who's going to be hurt by this. You're adding teams. Who does that hurt? How does it impact Tennessee? Everybody keeps saying, well, eventually it's going to go to a Super League. What the heck would a Super League look like, and is it possible to even get to a Super League? That's the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about today. Let's get right into it. Our first segment is brought to you by our friends at the Garza Law Firm. All the uncertainty surrounding the SEC right now and Tennessee's place in it could leave you feeling nervous, and that's the same feeling you'll probably experience if you ever find yourself in need of a quality attorney. And while the Garza Law Firm can't really help with football tension, Marcos and his team can help you when it comes to putting your mind at ease when you have legal issues you're having to tackle. They are the best in town. They've been the best in town for a long time. Check out garzalaw.com or just ask around. You'll hear good things. Garza Law, the Garza Law Firm. Turn to them when you have a legal need. All right. I want to welcome in the first three members of our panel today. We're going to be rotating early on, but they're actually four analysts and myself here, so there's five of us today. Want to welcome in Jimmy Himes right there, Ryan Callahan right here, Josh Ward. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. It's appreciated. As I said, Media Days event being moved to the Lone Star State for the first time ever. You've got 16 schools who are going to be at this thing, so that means more boring talk. But it also shows this is not your daddy's SEC in terms of where they're doing this and how many schools are involved, et cetera. Last week we talked about whether or not this expansion is good for fans in any way. I want to ask today, is it good for schools? Which schools? I'm not talking money here. Let's keep it strictly to football. And I want to know which schools in the SEC, and there are going to be some obvious ones, I expect us to just throw those out quickly, which schools are hurt by Oklahoma and Texas coming into this league, by the end of division play, by all the other permutations that spin out of a bigger league? Which schools are hurt the most?
I'll start with the old SEC East. I'll go Vanderbilt, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Missouri, I guess I would throw in there for most years, even though they're pretty good right now. I don't know that they'll be able to sustain this. So to me, those four programs, you're going to have a harder time sustaining anything resembling long-term success because you're just knocked down the pecking order that much farther. So I think the SEC East protected those programs in some years, allowed Kentucky to be a 7-8 win team. Now that's going to be even harder without division play. So I think all that works against those old SEC East teams.
Yeah, Kentucky got the 10 wins twice in 4 years.
Yep.
I don't see that happening again. And I think it's going to hurt Missouri because I think that Texas and Oklahoma will handle them. And that, to me, that's one of the teams you think, well, okay, so they're getting a couple of rivalry teams.
Yeah.
Well, would those teams beat them? What good does that do you? And I feel the same about Arkansas in that.
Yeah.
I think it hurts Arkansas. They're struggling right now anyway. Mm-hmm. And now when you put Texas and Oklahoma rivals and those rivals beat you, I think that hurts. I think almost half the league is hurt by Texas and Oklahoma coming in.
You could make a case that everyone but the absolute blue bloods who are on top right now are hurt to some extent because the path to Atlanta just got unbelievably more difficult. I mean, the idea, it's still two teams out of a big league. Yes, but it's no longer just being the best out of what might be a bad 7-team division. You got to be the second best team out of 16, not the best out of this 7. That is a massive, massive change, I think. So you could make a case that a lot of teams are going to be hurt by this. Who's hurt?
Yeah, if you're talking about Atlanta, everybody is negatively affected in some way just because there are 2 more teams that will have a shot at Atlanta, and they're 2 quality programs. When you talk about Oklahoma and Texas, they're going to come in thinking, well, let's get to Atlanta. Let's go play for an
Texas,
SEC title.
certainly. They're telling people already.
Immediately.
Yeah.
But if you kind of zoom out big picture, Missouri and then Arkansas, I would go both from a competitive standpoint, but also recruiting. They can't go to Texas and say, hey, come play for us to be in the SEC. They can maybe to lower level prospects, but Texas and Texas A&M are saying the same thing. Yeah. Oklahoma is saying the same thing. There used to be an SEC versus the Big 12 recruiting battle. Now you can't say, come play in the SEC any more than the newcomers can. Yeah.
I was looking at it and I was trying to think, all right, Kentucky, and you mentioned most of these, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M have never made it to Atlanta. Now, A&M has had some good teams, and they've only been in the league for 12 years, but still put them in there. So if you've never made it to Atlanta, it gets harder. Teams that have never won once they've made Atlanta, Carolina, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi State. All right, that's a huge chunk. A&M also hurt by what you're talking about, Texas coming in.
Yeah.
They've already, you had Texas come in and swipe their baseball coach. We're talking football, but Texas is going to rub their nose in the fact that their little brother, they are already. So I think it's a terrible deal for Texas, for A&M. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, there's a reason they were so upset day number 1 at SEC Media Days when news leaked out.
And I can't blame them, which we'll get into. But so you got Kentucky, Vandy, Ole Miss, A&M, Carolina, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi State. Those teams have never won in Atlanta. Some of them have never reached Atlanta. So what about, does this hurt LSU, Florida, Tennessee, Auburn? I'm taking Alabama, Georgia, and Texas out. Now, we don't know about Texas. We don't know about Oklahoma. I don't think it's going to be good for them. But let's talk about the traditional SEC, kind of that middle grade. Those teams that can make a run, bounce up, win a national championship, but then they kind of fall back behind the Bamas and Georgias right now. Florida, LSU, Tennessee, Auburn. Who's hurt by this out of those 4? Is one of them hurt more than the others?
I think all of them are hurt just about equally. I think Tennessee, I would lean toward the SEC East teams being hurt more because Tennessee, Florida had a more manageable path. If they caught Georgia in the right year, they play Alabama and LSU, maybe you get lucky and that's a year you get some help from Georgia and you make the SEC title game. Now that's not going to be possible. You're going to have to go in looking at it like one SEC loss is all you can afford to have any shot at Atlanta because in the 16-team league, somebody's going to make it there with one loss. So I think it's those SEC teams first, but even LSU and teams like that, it's going to be harder. It's just everybody's knocked down a peg, to your point. It's everybody but the teams at the very, very top are going to be affected.
Right.
It's going to be harder. I think immediately it's going to be Florida because they're going to fire their coach after this year.
Right, they're down at the
Probably,
moment. Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it hurts Tennessee. And while I like what Josh Heupel's done and he's brought this program back to relevancy, I think it's going to be difficult with Texas and Oklahoma in here. And if you take out the 90s and you go back to like 1960 going forward, Tennessee is pretty much in the middle of the pack of the SEC as far as their SEC record. So I think it's going to hurt Tennessee. How significantly, I'm not sure, but I do think it hurts. It just moves them, in my opinion, down the pecking order a little bit.
I'll give you another way of looking at it, and could be wrong, but it's another way of looking at it. You could make the case that Auburn and Tennessee would be hurt less than Florida LSU simply because, again, this may be nonsense, but Auburn and Tennessee both played Alabama and Georgia every year anyway. All right. So, and Auburn had Alabama, Georgia, LSU. Tennessee had Alabama, Georgia, Florida. Okay. How much tougher can the schedule be than what you've already been through? Whereas some of these other teams, I don't know that they were playing 3 teams that had won, Florida had 2, Georgia's got 2, Alabama had 6. That's a lot of national championships over the last 20 years, and you were playing those teams every year. So I just wonder if LSU and Florida will have to step up a little more in terms of their schedule than Tennessee and Auburn will.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
I didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but to me it does depend on the scheduling format for the future because to your point, there are some ways where this might come out better for Tennessee and Auburn, teams like that. So I'm not saying it's going to help them, but it might be about a wash. You take off Alabama every year or Georgia every year, you add Texas or Oklahoma, it might be about the same.
Now, where it may help Florida and LSU is their recruiting in their state is so good. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's not as good in Tennessee's better now.
That's a good point.
It's a lot better, but it's not as good as Texas or Florida.
Which has been something that has, Arkansas traditionally tried to get into Texas, but their recruiting hasn't been great. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Oklahoma. Yeah. Now, at least Texas is coming with them and Texas A&M, but that we talked about it last week. I think I have more questions about Oklahoma than I do Texas. I'll let you finish this up.
Yeah, to Jimmy's point on Florida, I do think the timing is terrible. They're trying to get back to being at a high level. They have a brutal schedule. Part of that is their own fault because they scheduled so hard out of conference, but time continues to get away from the last time they were at an elite level. This show has covered how many coaches they've gone through.
They've turned into Tennessee.
Yeah, so they inherit such a difficult schedule right away. That's only going to make it tougher. Tennessee is in a pretty good position. If this were 3 years ago, it would feel like terrible timing for Tennessee.
Yeah.
One thing that I do think balances things out for these programs, maybe getting to Atlanta's tougher, they do at least get a 12-team playoff to where fans can say, well, if we're not the top 2, if we can be top 4, maybe 5 and get in to the playoff, you can still have a happy fan base even if you're falling short of Atlanta.
Yeah, and I think you can make the pretty good case that long term, the 4 playoff slots are going to mean more than the SEC championship. Okay. When we come back, is the SEC wise to delay a move to a 9-game conference schedule? Look, we've talked the last couple of years that they should go to 9. I still think they're kind of cowardly to not do it. But are they wise to be cowards? Are they smart chickens? That's the thing. We'll discuss that next. Coming back.